the midwife assists in a birth.
Right.
And I gather that the philosopher who is a midwife is giving birth to the soul.
Yes. And this is what this is, giving birth to the soul.
Yeah.
But I was also into Proclus in those days.
Yeah.
And Proclus calls Socrates a midwife.
Mm-hmm.
He said, this is midwifery.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, that's what I'm doing. I'm a midwife.
Yeah.
So that's where the term philosophical midwifery came out of.
Uh-huh.
And then when I worked out the details of it, of course, then I then discovered it was the same dynamics that occurred in Homer's Iliad.
Mm.
But I chose it because...
I should just mention that we discussed this in a previous interview, the story of how Achilles came to a realization of his own patterns and therefore was willing finally to enter into battle after he had withdrawn.
Yes.
So that's the reference to the Iliad.
Yes.
And if people want more detail on that, I will post a link to that interview.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And from that, I did this dialogue I called Alcibiades, and it got published.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't realize the significance of it, the implications of it for several years. And I said to myself, Pierre, maybe you're a psychologist. Maybe you're really a psychologist. You're really not a philosopher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I said, I better start over. So I packed up the family in San Francisco after I got my degrees. And I said, I think I'm going to study psychology at the New School of Research in New York City. Mm-hmm. So I joined them.
Yeah.
And what I found there was a disaster. I found that they didn't know what they were doing. We were studying, at that time, the Minnesota Symposium of Motivations. And they had a classic example we spent our time studying. And it was a number of parachuters. They were volunteers. They were all wired up on all kinds of electronic devices in order to test the level of anxiety. And we were into Dollard and the other guy's name.
Miller and Dollard.
Yes. And they had the gradient where you should watch the curve of anxiety, withdrawal, and escape, approach and avoidance.
Yes.
And
reminds me very much already of my first encounter with clinical psychology and behaviorism.
Good.
I had a job fresh out of college at a place called the Singer Zone Center in Rockford, Illinois. Prided itself on being 10 years ahead of the times. And I lasted 6 weeks, so...
Oh, well then we're similar, because what happened is the parachutists, by every indication, they were wired in all variety of ways. Their level of anxiety said, escape.
Uh-huh.
But they continued up the ladder into the plane and jumped. I said, gentlemen, your theory is false. They should have withdrawn. They should not have gotten on the plane.
Mm-hmm.
What are you teaching? They said, oh, no, this is a good study. I said, of course it's a good study. It shows that your theories are false. Well, that ended my career at the New School of Social Research. So I decided the best thing to do is to look for a teaching job doing philosophy, and I'd spend my time doing philosophy.
Well, I understand exactly where you're coming from, because one might naively assume, especially with a background in philosophy, that psychologists are interested in the psyche. And it turns out they're not.
They're not. That's right. You see, I went under that assumption, and I found out they got very bitter. They got upset at my views. I said, well, gentlemen, I might as well leave.
They want to claim the name psyche in their name psychology, but they really don't want to have anything to do with it, except recently. Now they're beginning to look at the psyche, but for the most part, they prefer to be thought of as behavioral scientists.
You know, that's very sad.
Yeah.
and it's true. They started aping
Physics.
Newtonian physics, and empirical methods. And the psyche is not in that realm. The psyche is in the realm of the mind. And so I decided, well, the best thing to do is do my own studies and continue. So I got a position in Southern California, and I started exploring problems, and out of that came a club. We started a club, and then the school got upset with having a club, so we moved off to campus and started the Noetic Society, and that's how it began.
But the basic idea, as I gather, is that you use the Socratic method in order to uncover what you call the pathologos, meaning false ideas we have about ourselves. And when people are conscious of what had previously been unconscious with regard to their very being, then there's some movement.
Yeah, there's growth.